Aristotle has this great line, Dave, when in the context he's talking about the importance of virtue, that a man who is gripped in fear at swarming bees can neither think nor act well.
Tom, you shouldn't tell our members that. Because a lot of our members, especially the members here close in town, the ones who've gotten to know me over the years, they know my complete irrational fear of anything that flies.
You're a little freaky about flying things.
Put me on an airplane, I'm good. But anything that's alive that flies doesn't work well for me.
Well, I was thinking about the bees this weekend because I was standing in my backyard watering my bushes, and there was a bee. I was barefoot, and I stepped on one, and it stung me right on the bottom of my foot, and it's been driving me crazy. It itches. It doesn't really hurt, but it itches intensely. So I was up last night with the tweezers trying to dig around, pull the little stinger out. I can't get the darn thing out. But it did remind me of that great line by Aristotle, and he's talking about the importance of virtue.
Right.
Because you want to be able to think well so that you can act well, so you can live well. And that's the whole idea of virtue, right? Virtue is part of living a good life as a human being. And in the case of being a citizen, there are certain virtues that are indispensable for living freely, living as a free, responsible citizen. It's why we emphasize the virtues, certain civic virtues, at the Vino Veritas Society.
Well, if I was more into making excuses, I'd have that excuse for the last 6 to 12 months. A few of our members know I've had pigeons nesting on my balcony right outside my bedroom, and I hear them all day and all night when I'm at home. Don't do well with pigeons.
I don't know much about pigeons. Do pigeons make noise at night?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. And it's been kind of ongoing. So for those who don't know the story, the quick story is Epcot Center in Orlando has like these 4D movies.
Hang on. I used to know this. I myself. Environmental Protocol, or is it Educational Protocol City of the Future? Epcot.
I had no idea.
I think it's something like this.
Okay.
Something City of
Educational
Tomorrow.
Protocol.
City of Tomorrow. Yes, that's
interesting.
Yeah.
So I was about 6 years old, and we went. My dad and my sister and I went down to Epcot Center. Maybe it was 7.
Yeah.
We went down to Epcot Center. They've had some really great what they call 4D movies, where the seat actually interacts with you as well.
Right.
The seat blows on you. It makes certain noises that only you would hear.
Yeah.
Things like that. I remember they used to have one for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, if you remember the Rick Moranis movie. But this year in particular that we went, the 4D movie was The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock.
Okay, and you're a little kid.
And I'm a little kid. And at the end, I mean, the birds are like snipping at you using air.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, this big crow just comes and attacks you at the end. I was not happy.
Yeah.
Didn't do well with it, and it scarred me for life. So it is spiders, snakes, the rest, I don't care. But don't put birds around me.
Nothing flying.
I spent my last weekend, I spent a solid 4 hours getting rid of these pigeons who are nesting with eggs on my balcony.
Dave Rich making war on the pigeons.
It was not good.
So who was victorious?
They're gone. They are totally gone.
Congratulations.
It was really interesting. You know, I always think about pigeons as like these flying rats that are just stupid animals.
Right.
The homing pigeon, right? The carrier pigeon, homing pigeon.
Yeah.
It's real. They knew exactly where they were coming back to every time. And you could tell for about 12 hours. They just kept coming back, and they'd walk around the balcony like, what happened here?
Right.
And finally, I think as of this morning, they've finally given up. So I have no more excuses to be a bad thinker. My excuses are all gone. I'll listen to Aristotle. My excuses are gone. It's time to start becoming a better thinker.
No pigeons, no swarming bees. Yeah. Well, what else is going on in the world besides, pigeons and bees?
When I'm not paying attention to the pigeons, I've been trying to pay a little bit of attention to the G7 summit. And for those who haven't been watching...
Is that where a bunch of people who don't understand economics get together and talk about how they're going to save economies?
Right.
Yeah.
Save the world economy. It's where they're building the global infrastructure. There's been a lot that's come out of it. Everybody's now making a big deal that Biden's most recent conversation or public statement was that Vladimir Putin is a worthy adversary, but the Republican Party is not. He decided to say that Vladimir Putin's this worthy adversary that he needs to take very seriously, but the Republican Party is falling on its face, and the Republican Party is fractured, and they have no leadership, and all of these things. And I'm okay, sure, Joe.
Right.
Whatever you say. Somebody fed him the line, and
Right.
he just says what he's told.
Right.
That said, he did go in with one policy agenda that I think we do need to talk about, because it really applies to, what was it, 2-3 weeks ago, we had the conversation about nation states, and we were talking about welfare states in particular.
Yeah. The term political scientists use is the developmental state.
Right.
And what that basically means is a poor country that begs rich countries for subsidies.
And then there's the question about how do they use them, and
Right.
and are they creating a system, an ecosystem within their country that allows people to be free and prosper and flourish, or are they using our tax dollars to create their own welfare system?
By the way, I don't think I got to mention during that earlier conversation, and it's worth injecting. It's a big point. I had the unique opportunity of sitting down with the former communist prime minister of Ethiopia.
Right.
At my kitchen table. I interviewed him at great length over the course of about 3 weeks. He would come over 3 to 4 days a week, and we'd spend anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. And I was interviewing him. I was contemplating writing a book on the subject. His whole story is fascinating. He was part of a group of young communists in the 70s. And when the Soviets came in and set up a Soviet government in Ethiopia, they called it the Derg. Derg is an Amharic word. Amharic is the most common language in Ethiopia. And language itself is a fascinating subject. In a place like Ethiopia, it's so tribal. Mm-hmm. There are something like 8,000 different languages spoken in Ethiopia because there are all these little tribal. But Amharic is considered to be the national language. And that word Derg simply means committee. So it is the Communist Committee, that is the government, set up by the Soviet Union. And this man who I interviewed, his name is Tamrat Lane, Layne. People can Google him if you're interested. He's still around. He's back in Ethiopia, I believe. And he was part of a group of young students who they thought the Soviet Union was insufficiently communist, that they weren't thorough devotees of Karl Marx. And so they literally fled the city and lived up in the mountains for 17 years. And they built a guerrilla army up there. One of the questions I asked him, I said, Tamara, what do you do in the mountains for 17 years? I mean, I know you're building an army and you're organizing, but you can only do army training so many hours of the day. Well, what else did you do? And he said, we studied. And I said, what are you studying? They wrote letters to American universities, state universities.
Right.
And requested materials, and these universities would send them cases of things like Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. They got thousands of copies of Marxist, progressive, top-selling books in the United States, and these Ethiopians in the mountains are setting themselves up into classrooms, and they're studying this stuff and taking tests over it. And this is how they're learning about Marxism, is by reading American academic progressive literature.
What year are we talking?
This would be in the 1980s.
Okay.
And in 1991, so this is as the Soviet Union is collapsing, they are withdrawing from Ethiopia and from most of their bases around the world. And this guerrilla army invades the capital of Ethiopia, and it's violent. They are shooting and killing people. It's that man who sat at my table, he's shot people with machine guns, AK-47s. And this is in 1991, and they create a new communist government in Ethiopia. He is the prime minister for 4 years, from 91 to late 94. And then I don't remember, they had all these high positions, the El Presidente or whatever his title was, turned on him and had him arrested for betraying the party. And he then spent 12 years in an Ethiopian prison, which is the kind of living hell you imagine it would be.
I'm sure.
Anyway, he was there You remember back in the 80s, all those, there were these big rock concerts, global rock concerts where they were raising money to
Live Aid, Farm Aid,
all those things.
Queen's last concert. For anybody who doesn't know what you're talking about, the recent movie Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
That was the closing scene.
That's right. That's right. And foreign governments are sending all kinds of aid, money, food, medicine, clothes, you name it, to Africa, to Ethiopia. And Tamrat told me what they did with it. He said, you know what we did with all those resources? We divided it up and we gave away much of it to our allies, our political friends. Cronies. And then we would gather our opposition, our opponents, and we would put big mounds of the medicines and the food and everything else, the clothes, and we'd burn it in front of them so that they could see that. They could just see it all going up in flame, and that's your punishment for not supporting us politically. Yeah. So this is what Joe Biden and these guys at the G7, they want to turn the whole world into that kind of developmental welfare state. Well,
I want to go back to G7, but I have a couple of questions about Tamrat Lane. That you and I have actually talked about this several times, and we've never actually had the back and forth. So I want to ask a couple questions.
Right.
First, when you talk about being insufficiently communist, it gives me images of late in life Teddy Roosevelt, right? That Woodrow Wilson is insufficiently progressive version of Teddy Roosevelt, and you wonder, I would be interested to know how many of the same books, how many of the same readings. Teddy Roosevelt was doing what we're talking the late teens. The late 19 teens. And then they're probably reading a lot of these same books in the late 1980s.
Right.
And coming to the same conclusions that Teddy Roosevelt was coming to.
Well, they were certainly, they were reading Marx, clearly they were reading, and it was,
and probably Hegel,
this was quite astounding to sit with this man at my dining room table, and we would have coffee. He would always come over in the mornings, and he's from Ethiopia. He literally around the world. His life is so different than mine. We look different from each other. We had this in common. I spent years studying Marx. I've read almost everything Marx has ever published, and a lot of his unpublished letters. And Tamrat it was very obvious when we started talking about Marx. He knew Marx. I mean, he's really studied Das Kapital, right, and his other works in tremendous detail. He gets it. They read Lenin. They read some of the memoirs written by Chairman Mao. So, prominent, influential communist politicians, those types they were reading, as well as some of the other academics. And what the Ethiopian communists saw, they saw a couple of things. One was that their main critique of the Soviet Union was that it was too imperialistic. It was trying to take over and conquer the world. And from their point of view, they said that's just what America is. That the Soviets and America are the same. They're both imperialist powers trying to take over and control the world. The other big critique they had was how the cronyism within the Kremlin, right? You have people starving in the Soviet Union, but if you're part of the party, you're eating fine food prepared by professional chefs on gold and silver plated, china and that kind. There's a huge gap between the way the party elites live and the common folk live in most communist nations.
It makes you wonder if that same movement is happening within China right now, right? For the same reasons. One, China has imperialist notions, attitudes. They want to expand Chinese communism throughout the world. Are there people who are saying, well, you're just like America, or people who hate America, Chinese people who hate America or who hate the West?
Right.
Are they saying, wait, you're doing the same thing? And are they noticing the same case of, well, these Chinese Uyghur Muslims are insufficient to you, so they can live in concentration camps where you can harvest them for organs, but the elites are living like royalties never seen before.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. Going back to the Roosevelt comment, there was a bigger thought that I had in that, and that was it almost disproves one of the fundamental ideas of progressivism. The fact that Teddy Roosevelt in the 19 teens, Teddy Roosevelt, born in America, served as a Republican president. Teddy Roosevelt, who is known for his hunting and his outdoorsmanship and his that whole what people today would call white privilege, right? I mean, it's hard to say that Teddy Roosevelt didn't qualify for what the left today would call white privilege.
Right.
And he read these things and he came to that conclusion. Mm-hmm. He came to the conclusion that progressivism is the way to go.
Is the way. Yep. Yes, he did.
Now, fast forward 70 years, fast forward to the late 1980s, to a poor group of Ethiopian people living in the mountains by themselves.
Yep. Literally sleeping in caves and eating whatever they can catch and
coming to the same conclusion. That tells me human nature doesn't change and human nature isn't subjective.
Right.
You know, we talk about the entire foundation of the progressive movement is that human nature is all about the way you're raised and the viewpoint you have, and that somebody who is a black woman is going to interpret a document completely different than a white man, a wealthy white man is going to. Well, no. Look at these two groups. They read the same writing and they came to the same conclusions.
And they couldn't have been more more diametrically opposed in everything about their background. Right. White privileged Teddy Roosevelt out on, what do you call it when you go hunting big game expeditions or safaris, things like that.
Right.
And a group of just dirt poor Ethiopians trying to build an army so that they can launch a communist revolution.
Likely learning the language just to be able to read the books.
Yes,
very
much so.
Most of them probably didn't speak much English until they started reading those books.
And that's part of what they were doing, as Tamrat explained, as they were organizing themselves into schools in the mountain. They set aside time and they studied and they took quizzes and they took tests and all that kind of stuff. And there were those who were bilingual, who were helping the others translate so that they could read and understand these things. I'll throw out one more just fascinating little story. When they took control, what was it called? The Ethiopian, the People's Republic of Ethiopia. And this was in 1991. So now they're in power. Mm-hmm. And all their friends who had helped fight in the revolution, drive the Soviets out, the Soviets are gone. They start looking around and they realize we're now in charge. And we have made promises to everyone. Free education, free housing, free medicine, free food. How are we going to do this? And so they divide them so they're ministers of everything, a minister of agriculture, a minister of education, which totalitarian regimes tend to do. And Tamrat focused on a story in the capital of Ethiopia, which is far and away the largest city. There was one concrete factory, cement factory, and they went and toured it. And it was operating at about 10% of its capacity. And there was all kinds of problems with this cement factory. Mm-hmm. And they tried several different things. And they were taking classes. Oxford University in England was sending down to Ethiopia a handful of scholars who were teaching this new group in charge of the Ethiopian government. And one of them was a free market economist. And he was teaching these people, right, the basics of property rights and productivity and supply and demand. And so the Ethiopian government came up with an experiment. And Tamrat was in charge of it. And the experiment was they went to the guys running the cement factory. They weren't going to let them actually own it. It was not complete private property. But what they did say is, here are all the costs and expenses. If you can generate more revenue than that, you can keep the revenue. So they were incentivized to make it as efficient as possible. And within something like 6 months, that thing was up to 95% of productivity. And he showed me photos of big trucks, cement trucks, lined up for miles out to pull into the cement factory to load up with concrete and head off. And this is one of the reasons he ends up getting arrested, because he starts to realize, wow, where people have a profit incentive, they tend to be more serious, they tend to be more efficient, they tend to be more productive. And so he wants to take that the lesson learned from the concrete factory and start applying it to other areas. And members of the Communist Party see that really as treason. I mean, as a betrayal of the party.
So it's interesting you brought this up today. I don't know that we talked about this, but I'll be the first to admit I'm a little bit ignorant about the last 30 years of Ethiopian history.
Right.
I mean, it's not really been something on my radar. But post Tamrat,
it hasn't been very pretty. It's been filled with corruption.
Okay. At one point in the last 30 years, they've gone from communist regime to dictatorship.
They still consider themselves communists.
Well,
yes.
You could have a communist dictator.
Yes.
But
right.
as opposed to a communist group overseeing the government. Now there's one person who's I'm making the decisions on behalf of the country, right? A dictator like a Mao, like a Lenin, like a Stalin, like a Hitler, whatever it might be.
They like to conceal that. Okay. So they create these organizations. They love the word committee. Everything is done in committees, but there's always someone behind the scenes pulling the strings. That way the committee looks more representative. It looks more like a Congress, like something that's representative of the people.
So I bring this up because over the weekend, I was actually trying to drive to meet with you, and I was leaving the grocery store, and I get caught in a protest parade in the middle of Denver to free the people of Tigray, which is a subdivision of Ethiopia
yes, it is.
That is being tortured, people killed, people being seriously hurt and harmed by this dictatorial communist regime in Ethiopia. And so it's amazing. Things never change. And the same thing is going to happen every time you have progressivism, you have communism, you have social, whatever name you want to give it, that foundational progressive ideas.
Yes.
They always lead to the same thing.
Absolutely. Ethiopia is a model of central planning. That's really at the core. They have a group that wants to plan everything. A couple of interesting, kind of takeaways. I should probably explain. I imagine some of our audience members are thinking, well, how did this guy end up in Denver, Colorado? And it's a curious story. So when Tamrat is in prison for 12 years, he was married, he had children, and his wife is being threatened, and she doesn't think they're going to survive if they stay. And so she makes arrangements through friends. She leaves. Illegally. She flees I believe she got into Kenya, went to the U.S. Embassy, explained that she was married to a former government official who's a political prisoner. And so they granted her asylum, and of all places, they flew her to Denver, Colorado. And she lived here. At one point, I think she was working in a Macy's store. I don't know her whole story of what but the daughters went to school here. And then Tamrat got out of prison. Where's he going to go? He's going to go be with his family. He comes to Denver, Colorado, and end up going through a program that I've been teaching in for a number of years. And that's how we met. And I wanted to know more about his story, so I invited him over for coffee, and I said, "Do you care if I would just like to interview you?" And he let me. I have it on recording. I interviewed him for many dozens of hours. The other thing that becomes very clear, listening to him speak in a regime of central planning like Ethiopia, when he says the party, it's much more than what we think of here. When we think of a political party, we think, first of all, one among others. There are many parties. We also think of something that is outside of and disconnected from government. There's the party, but the party doesn't pass legislation, right? Congress passes legislation. The party doesn't judge disputes, the Supreme Court, right? There's a separation of government and party in the United States. In Ethiopia, as in most communist regimes of central planning, the party is everything. The party is the government. The party claims to represent the people. So if you oppose the party, you are opposing your government, you're opposing your regime. In the eyes of the party, you're opposing your people. And therefore, voicing opposition to the party really is the equivalent of treason. And this is why, just like they did in the Soviet Union, in places like Ethiopia, they would do purges. They would go and find people who were not sufficiently supportive of the party. And if you're not supporting the party, then you're betraying the country. You need to be prosecuted, persecuted, punished somehow, put in prison, or even worse.
Which brings us right back to Joe Biden saying Vladimir Putin's a worthy adversary, but the Republican Party is not. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about central planning. We've talked about these developmental states, these welfare states.
Yeah.
The G7, there has been one thing that has been introduced by the United States above all else. There was one thing that Biden and his cohorts have been pushing at the G7 summit, and that is...
Would it be an emphasis on property rights around the world?
You're funny.
Private property? No?
That's cute. I'm gonna take us a step back.
Okay.
One of the big pushes at the very beginning of Donald Trump's 4 years in office that the Democrats threw a fit about, I mean, was absolutely the most horrific thing that they could do, was Donald Trump wanted to lower the corporate tax rate.
Right.
And he wanted to bring it down to like 18 to 20%.
Yep.
He ended up settling at about 25.
Okay.
It was because what happens is, and for those who don't know how this works, what happens is, when you are a U.S.-based company and you make money overseas, you make money, let's say, in China, right? Apple sells 1 billion computers in China or 1 billion devices of one form or another in China.
Right.
They pay corporate income tax in China on the money that they make in China.
Okay.
If China's corporate income tax rate is, I think China's is somewhere around 15%. 10 or 15%. Let's say 10, just easy numbers, right? Our corporate income tax rate under Obama was over 30. I think at one point it was almost as high as 38%. If you leave that money in China, then you don't pay any more taxes on it. But if you bring that money back to the United States, you have to pay the difference. So you pay your full income taxes. If it's 38%,
right,
you pay your full income tax, but you get to write off whatever you paid that foreign country. So if China took 10, you only pay you pay another 28%,
right,
when you bring it back home. What was happening was all of the major companies, all of these very Democrat-leaning companies, Amazon, Apple, Google, they were all opening international offices in places like Ireland. Why? Because Ireland's corporate tax rate at the time was 3.5%. Right? And all these countries do the same thing. So when you pay your 10% rate in China, if you bring the rest of the money back to Ireland, there's no more tax to be paid. So, and if you sell an item in Ireland, you're paying your 3.5% corporate tax rate, and that's it. And all of these companies were keeping billions and billions and billions of dollars overseas in foreign banks because they didn't want to bring it back over here. And what it was doing was it was actually threatening the survival of some of these companies. GE was a great example. GE at the time had a pension debt for all of their past employees. GE had pension programs, and they had something like a $8 billion pension debt on their books that they couldn't pay. GE is not what they used to be. They've struggled. They couldn't pay their bills. But if they brought the money back over from overseas, they were going to have to pay so much of it in taxes, they still wouldn't be able to pay their pension debt. As soon as Trump dropped it down to 25%, they brought it back. They paid a much smaller amount in corporate tax rates, and they moved on. So that's how the whole thing works. Joe Biden wants to raise it back up, wants these companies to pay their fair share, right? So he says to us, to all of these world leaders, I need the U.S.'s corporate tax rate has to go higher. We cannot keep only taking 25%. But you guys are threatening our ability to do that. So if you want to keep getting aid from the United States, if you want to keep being our allies, guess what? You have to have a minimum corporate tax rate yourselves. We want every one of you to commit, Ireland included. We want every single one of you to commit that you won't have a tax rate below 15%. Sounds like taxation without representation to me.
Absolutely. It also speaks to the dirty lie. People like Joe Biden like to say, well, we're not taxing ordinary citizens, we're going to tax the rich and we're going to tax these big corporations.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, all that money, right, even if it's a big company like Google and they have their own bills to pay, and if they can't pay it because they're paying too much in taxes, what do they end up doing? They raise their prices. And so a tax on a business, I don't care if it's a local, mom and pop shop or a gigantic corporation, a tax on a business really is a tax on the people. It's a tax on the customers.
Yeah. And think about how that does play onto the local small business, right? The local small business still has to pay those corporate tax rates.
Yeah.
You and I, as we make money on as we make membership dues on Vino Veritas Society, we still have to pay corporate tax rates. Right. So Donald Trump brings it down to 25%.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden wants to bump it back up to 35 plus.
Mm-hmm.
We're not selling anything overseas. We're not a big enough business to go say, okay, we're going to keep a bank account overseas and not spend it in America and not hire American employees.
Not yet.
Well,
we're on our way.
Fair.
Yeah.
But the whole idea here is we are not opening separate bank accounts where we could say, I'm going to hire only employees overseas and Google and Intel. I mean, Intel makes all of their computer chips in Israel.
Right.
Why? Because it's a better tax rate. It's more effective. It's more efficient for them.
Yep.
So you have all of these companies keeping. But think about the local mom and pop shops that are now going to have to pay 35, 38% tax on every dollar that they make.
And here's the thing about small businesses, and small businesses are the engine of the United States economy. And so many Americans have swallowed this progressive line, hook, line, and sinker, that business is greedy, business is evil, business is selfish. The truth is most businesses are small businesses, and most small businesses, number one, if they're profitable, they're barely profitable. Their profit margins are really small, meaning they're just barely making more money than all their expenses combined. It's also true for many small businesses, even if they're profitable during one quarter or one period or 1 year, it doesn't mean they're profitable all the time. They might also have quarters and years where they're losing money. And so they got to try to save up while they're making some profit for the periods when they're not. More importantly, around 80%, the vast majority of new businesses that start up, small businesses, fail within 18 months.
Right.
They're gone. They don't succeed for all kinds of reasons. And so that realm of business really is made up of small business owners who are risk takers. They're entrepreneurs. They're trying to provide value for others. Sometimes they're successful. Many times they're not. And so to come along and say, well, we got to take more from them. Why? They're the most productive people among us. They're the risk takers. They're the ones who are saying, I don't want to just sit on the couch all day. I want to get up and do something creative for other people. I want more of that. I don't want less of that.
Right. So, and it really does come down to an issue of value. What is this world if people aren't providing value to each other? If people just sit on their couch all day and sit on social media, which I'm beginning to wonder how much of COVID and how much of the push to keep COVID measures in place were people just wanting to, I don't want to go back to work.
Right.
I'm getting my housing paid for.
Right.
They're telling me I don't have to pay my rent anymore. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. I can default on things. It's starting to appear because now even these extra payments on unemployment are going away. And we still have a worker shortage.
Right.
We still have surveys going out with thousands of people saying, I don't want to go back to work.
Right.
I'm not going to go back to work. I'm just going to live this way.
Right.
I think when we see in some of these cities, especially in California, here in Denver, in cities with a nicer climate, the homeless, the level of homelessness, we've heard the stories repeatedly on the news for years of people who are voluntarily homeless. Right. This is I like camping in the mountains. I'm good with that. I don't really care. Just give me a tent and a mat. I don't need a house. I don't want that life. Okay. So they don't want to be productive. They have no more incentive to actually try to be productive because people have told them over and over and over in their life that if you go create value for somebody, or if you try to go get a job, you're part of the problem. You're oppressing somebody else who can't get that job because you're taking it.
But they want somebody to be productive because they want somebody to give them some things. And here's the thing about so this has been a central theme in progressivism over the last century, has been trying to demonize the idea of business, to demonize business owners. Mm-hmm. It's been very successful with the word corporation. The word corporation or corporate is basically become a synonym for evil in progressive circles. And part of that progressive messaging has been, look at the income gap. That's one of their favorite terms. There are some people who earn so much more money than others, or whose net worth, I was just reading an article this morning, Jeff Bezos, I think is, something like 185 million, 185 billion. Does that sound right?
How much he's worth?
His net worth
is 185 billion.
Okay.
And remember, that's been cut in half in the last couple of months.
Right.
Because he just got divorced and gave half to his ex.
So, look at people like that. They shouldn't be allowed. This is the progressive. They shouldn't be allowed to amass such obscene amounts of wealth when there are other people, employees at Amazon, make just a few dollars an hour and work in these terrible conditions. That's the narrative. But that's only part of the whole subject. The part that nobody ever talks about is the productivity gap. Why is it some people produce enormous amounts of value for enormous numbers of people?
Right.
How many people in a given day, in a given hour, in a given minute, how many people are receiving value from Jeff Bezos and Amazon and his business, and many?
Probably over 1 billion every hour.
Yeah.
Internationally.
They, instead of having to go make something, design something, create something on their own from scratch, they can click a button and for a few dollars it shows up sometimes the same day. I ordered something recently in the morning and like 2:00 in the afternoon, it showed up at my doorstep.
Imagine. I'm dreading my weekend of cleaning these pigeons off my balcony. Yeah. And I luckily from a family friend I got to borrow, he had a deck brush. It was a brush specifically designed to be strong enough to really hold up to like these fake wood, these what do you call them?
I know what you mean.
Yeah, this thing was strong. These bristles were unbelievable. I've never seen anything like this. Imagine if I had to make that myself. Imagine if I had to go mold the plastic and then I had to go buy the bristles and figure out how am I going to make the bristles, or where are the bristles going to come from, and then how am I going to?
What are all the elements needed to make the bristles, and where does that come from?
And I guarantee on my first try, my first 5 tries, my first 10 tries, even if I had all the ability in the world to create these things, I still wouldn't have come up with a brush that did the job that brush did. Right. Why? Because somebody was doing it for a living. That was how they were making their living. They invested time into research and development. They invested time into trial and error. They've probably gone through 10, 15, 20 iterations of what that brush looks like. Yep. And they figured out how to make a good, solid quality deck brush.
There was a guy in I think he lived in London, and he was a writer. He was a poet. And he decided to do a little experiment. And he was going to make a chicken sandwich, just a regular chicken sandwich, but from scratch thoroughly, meaning not rely on anyone else's technology to the degree possible. And even then, he sort of failed. But he said, okay, you start off with some basic things. I need some chicken. That means I need a chicken. Where do I get a chicken? I need an egg, and I got to raise the chicken. And then you need other things. You need some lettuce. If you want some bread for the buns, you gotta have flour, which means you have to have wheat. You gotta grow wheat. All of a sudden, it took him something like 9 or 10 years and thousands and thousands of dollars and thousands of hours to make a chicken sandwich. And then if you get into something like mayonnaise,
right,
right, and everything that goes in there, how do you get everything together?
Somewhere in there's a joke about what came first, the chicken or the egg.
The chicken or the egg. And the good Platonic answer is always the chicken. The idea of the chicken, the form of the chicken comes first.
So he had to go find a chicken first to then get an egg, to then grow another chicken.
That's right.
To start making his chicken sandwich.
And the point is, right, you can spend 10 years and $10,000 and 10,000 hours to get a chicken sandwich, or you can drive to your favorite, Wendy's or Chick-fil-A or wherever you like, and spend $2 or $3 and get a chicken sandwich. Now, think of that value right there. $10,000 to do it on your own, minus the $3 that it costs at Chick-fil-A. That's $9,997 of value you just got in that chicken sandwich because you didn't have to make it yourself.
He luckily lived in a time where he could go to the grocery store and eat in the meantime.
Right.
Go back to caveman times.
Yes. You're starving while you're trying to do that.
They weren't going to go and make the bread.
That's right.
They weren't going to go and they were going to eat.
That's right.
Because they were going to die otherwise.
That's right. And so these two concepts are they're hugely important and they're forgotten. And I think most economists don't do a very good job of teaching this to students. Number one is how we derive value from things that we purchase. No matter what the price, even an expensive thing like a car. A car is a relatively expensive purchase, or a home. Probably for most people, a house is the most expensive thing I think most people buy
in their lifetime.
So you spend whatever it is, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 on a house. That seems like a lot of money, but compare that to trying to go and make that house all on your own. Mm-hmm. Starting with, how are you going to make a nail?
Mm-hmm.
And one nail. How are you going to make a nail, right? How are you going to make the wires that's going to wire all the lights and electrical devices in your house, right? How are you going to, if you really start thinking about trying to make a house on your own, you quickly realize, well, I need a bunch of research and development. I need a bunch of scientists to figure all this. It's going to cost me billions and billions and billions of dollars and multiple lifetimes to create a house, or I spend the $500,000. All of a sudden, that $500,000 seems cheap compared to what it would take to do it on your own.
Now let's add in the kicker on that. The government regulations who tell you all of the requirements that your house have to meet in order for you to live there.
Make it even more expensive, right?
Oh, I mean, you wouldn't be able to. I mean, look at the new green deal, the green revolution, whatever you want to call it. These things about you have to have this much of your house has to be controlled by solar, and you have to have this kind of roof. You can't just have any roof.
Right.
You have to have a special kind of roof, and you have to have a special. I mean, all of those little things that the government is now saying, it's already driving housing prices
Makes
up.
You go up.
But you just spent all your time, your entire life, learning how to build a house. And look, yes, you talk about multiple life. There are people who built log cabins, and we have a couple people in our chapters alone who I guarantee you could say, go out and build a log cabin. You're getting no help.
Right.
They'd be able to, right? They'd be able to.
Maybe they would still need an axe, and they would need a chainsaw. And they would need these tools and even that stuff, right? If you were really to start from scratch, just walk out into the wilderness on your own.
We still have one or two I know for a fact have done it.
They could still do it.
But they wouldn't use nails. They'd use things like they'd whittle little pegs out of wood.
Yeah, they'd probably use a knife for that whittling.
Well,
but here's my big
they'd use
point.
an arrowhead. How's that?
I want to emphasize this is that when a business sells something to you, for those who are just listening and can't see, I'm going to explain the gestures I'm making. When you buy something from a business, and you think of the profit that business made. We're sitting here with a couple cups of coffee. When you buy a cup of coffee, maybe the business made 10 cents or 20 cents of profit on that cup of coffee. But the value you got, meaning you didn't have to go grow coffee beans, right? And everything else needed to make. The value that you received was far greater than the tiny little bit of profit from that cup of coffee.
Yeah.
The same is true with Amazon. Whatever profit Amazon has made, whatever profit Jeff Bezos has made, it's this. And including, I mean, that's a lot, $185 billion he's worth. But the value that Amazon has provided to other people is millions or billion times more than that.
Right.
I'm going to say something that some people will find shocking, surprising. Jeff Bezos' net worth is shockingly tiny compared to how much value Amazon has provided to billions of people around the world. So that's one point. And then the other point is, when you start looking at individuals, instead of talking about income gap or net worth gap, how about we talk about productivity gap? There are people who produce large amounts of value for large numbers of people. Whereas if you I don't know, if you run a little hamburger stand, how many people can you provide value for in a given day? Maybe you have, I don't know, 50 people, 100, maybe 500 people come to your hamburger stand on a busy day. 500 people. If you're making software, if you're Bill Gates, you can create software that's being used valuably by 2 billion people in one day, right? So the guy running the hamburger stand just can't provide value for as many people as the Bill Gates guy can. So it would make sense that Bill Gates is much wealthier. He's created more wealth for himself because he's produced more value for more people. And we tend not to think about that at all. We just tend to look at net worth. Think of high-paid athletes. I don't know who the highest paid athlete is right now. But is LeBron up? Okay. I figured he was way up there. Why is LeBron, why does he get paid so much? Because many thousands of people are willing to pay a lot of money for tickets to actually go see him in person. That's part of his worth. But beyond that, millions of people are willing to buy expensive cable TV packages so that they can sit at home and watch LeBron play, right? And other athletes like that. In other words, in doing what he does, he is providing value for millions of people, millions of basketball fans who love to watch basketball played really well. He provides value for millions of people. I want our audience members to think about what you do to provide value for others. If you provide very little value to a small number of people, then you shouldn't expect to get paid what LeBron gets paid or what Jeff Bezos gets paid.
And there's probably a couple people in our audience who are sitting there saying, yeah, but I hate LeBron James. And they're like me, right?
Right.
I hate LeBron James.
Right.
I don't think he provides a whole lot of value to people in America. But this goes back to our G7 conversation, right? We started this talking about G7. LeBron James, most of the value he's creating, he's creating value in China. China is the largest NBA market in the world. We no longer live
Great point.
in a small market where all of your money is the value you create for the people in your community or even within our country, right? It became a big deal when we started having the railroad system to have companies that could sell products nationally, sell products across the country. Now we have people selling products worldwide. And the NBA is not just selling cable packages in the United States. They're selling cable packages in South Africa, in Australia, in Italy, and they're selling in China. And that's why LeBron James would never, ever, ever come out and say anything negative about the Chinese market.
But it makes the basic economic point. He is, instead of saying he provides value, let me turn it around the opposite. Millions of people, many millions of people around the globe value watching LeBron James play.
Yes.
And that's why he gets paid these big contracts.
Right.
If tomorrow, hypothetically, the entire human population said, we don't care about basketball. We don't care. We don't value it. We're bored with it. We don't want it. Well, his economic value, LeBron James' economic value, would be reduced to zero. Nobody would pay him anything to play basketball if nobody cared to watch basketball.
I'll give you a more likely scenario. Because tomorrow the whole world isn't going to say, I hate basketball. But tomorrow it is a 50-50 shot that tomorrow Xi Jinping decides, you know what? The NBA is promoting capitalism. The NBA is rooted in capitalism. I don't like that. I am no longer going to allow the NBA to be shown in China.
Right.
And if that happens, LeBron James loses half his salary in a day.
Right.
More than half of his salary. He all of a sudden has a smaller market that he's providing value to.
Yep.
And his salary, the player's salary in the NBA, is based on a percentage of television revenue.
Yep. So
he has a max salary that is based on the amount of TV revenue that's coming in for
everything we're talking about here, this really is basic economic reality. And it's all true so long as people are free. So long as people are free to choose whose products and services they value and whose they don't, then all this makes sense. Those who produce products and services that many people really do value, they're creating wealth for themselves as they create value for others. The only wrinkle, the only rub, the only exception to all this is when you insert government. When government gets involved and government says, we're going to give a contract or a subsidy to this business, even though they're not providing, people don't value what they do, but we're going to subsidize them. Or we're going to pass regulations, issue regulations that create a monopoly for this business that's very poorly run and doesn't really create, but they can still become wealthy because of crony protections, crony perks. So government always highly skews that income and wealth creation, because when you get government involved, all of a sudden it's not the ones who are creating the most value, producing the most value for others. It's the ones who are politically connected, that are now getting the big contracts and making money. Get rid of that government intervention, get rid of the regulations, get rid of the subsidies, get rid of the contracts. Actually have free people competing, and what you find within a genuinely free market is those who produce the most value for the most people tend to become the wealthiest.
Right.
And those who produce very little value for very few people tend to not be very wealthy.
And that value comes from creating quality, filling a market need. We always say capitalism loves a vacuum.
Yep.
I guarantee if Xi Jinping said tomorrow, NBA's out, but he was not going to restrict a bunch of Chinese teams from developing their own league in China, there would be a basketball league because people love basketball in China. You know, as we wrap up, I think it's worth leaving everybody with a question that was posed to us over the weekend. I think it was over the weekend or late last week. We were sitting down. Our friend Ross Kaminsky had us over for a conversation, a couple of beers, and a few other people were joining us. And the question was posed. You know, we like to say think like the founders, learn to think like the founders. The question was posed, at what point would the founders have gotten frustrated with today's progressive world? And I say frustrated because I don't want to go into the whole conversation. We're way too late into the podcast to talk about revolution and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
But we talk about, I said it earlier, we talk about taxation without representation. I don't know what the founders would have said, how they would have acted, how they would have responded about the last 100 years of institutionalized progressivism in American government.
Right.
But today, what just happened this week at G7, that would have been a problem to them. I don't see any way around that.
It's basically an international conspiracy to take our money through taxation.
You now have foreign governments saying, if you want to do business here, you don't get a say in how much we're going to tax you, and we're going to tax you. And we're going to we've already seen it. We've seen American companies, the internet companies, the Facebooks, the Googles, getting additional taxation just for what they offer in Europe. In the European Union, they're getting additional taxes just for doing that. And there's nobody in Europe offering a counter company. They're just saying, we're going to keep letting the Americans over here, but if we let you in here, you're going to have to pay extra taxes.
Dave, I'm going to be so audacious as to speak for the founders and give what I think is the founders' response as a good positive kind of wrap up note on this podcast. I think the founders would say two things about what's going on in the G7. They would say, number one, reduce or eliminate corporate taxes around the world in all nations. And while you're at it, reduce or eliminate most regulations, because what will result? More people will be more productive. They'll try to be creative and create value. That's part one. And part two is if you can accomplish that, then people are freer. The message for those who want more, they want more choices in life. They want more resources. They want to earn more. Well, think very, very hard. Focus your mind on how can you create more value? How can you produce more value for more people? That's your path to improving your own life, to creating more wealth for yourself. That is a happy, positive message. And unfortunately, nobody at the G7 is going to be talking about that.
I'm going to add a third one.
Okay.
I'm going to add one third one.
Okay.
And that's going to be to these first world, and I put that in bunny ears for bunny quotes for anybody not who are listening, not watching, but for these developed nations, stop giving away free money to the welfare states and keeping them as welfare states, developing nations.
Stop giving away other people's money.
Stop giving away other people's money because you're not helping them.
Yeah.
We talked about this a few weeks ago. When Tom Shoes goes out and gives shoes to everybody, you're putting shoemakers out of work.
That's right.
When you go out and give free socks and free this and free that, you're giving them less ability to be productive for the people around them. And there are people who just want to go out and be productive and create value for themselves and their family.
You're absolutely right. Amen. That's why we've got to protect the ideas of freedom, the American idea, the idea of private property and free enterprise. It's why we're the guardians.
No sumus custodes.
Till next time.